democratic right.
Next week Tell me. Yes.
Good day, Councillor.
Good evening to all the viewers locked on. We are at the home stretch right now in completing our peaceful demonstration here along the Eastern Main Road in Tunapuna. People in this country are fed up. Our democracy has clearly been eroded in our parliament, a place where democracy is supposed to be respected and held the highest. Citizens of this country are very disenchanted with the state of our roads and other infrastructural aspects of the country. So we are here today to take a stance in a peaceful way, in a COVID compliant way. We would have maintained all COVID-19 restrictions, social distancing, masks, and we walked in a single file, not obstructing traffic or any type of activity in this busy road. So we're heading back to our starting point, and it was indeed a very visually impacting walk, and I think we was able to achieve what it is we had set out to do.
Thank you, Councillor, as we follow you in the walk for October Revolution.
Bobby! Join the revolution, boy.
Today, we are in the October Revolution. And we ask ourselves, where is Keith Rowley today? What golf course are you on today, Keith Rowley? Who are you bouncing down today, Keith Rowley? When we walk on this east-west corridor and see the holes in the road, the potholes, the pavements mash up, and then you and your government want to intrude and trample on the Constitution and breach our democracy. That is why we are out here today marching, because we are marching in defense of our democracy. You, the political arm of the state, getting involved and corrupting independent institutions in this country. That is the final straw when you break democracy and become a dictatorship. And enough is enough today. That is why we are here today supporting Sister Khadija Amin in her walk today to fight for democracy in this country. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Rowley must go. Yeah. Rowley must go.
Yeah, yeah.
I talk already.
You talk already? Right, look dealing.
Yes, people, we are out here today in support of the United National Congress, our leader, the Honorable Kamala Prasad, as we stand together for the rights of your democracy. Enough is enough. PNM has failed us. They are incompetent. They are proven to disrespect our country overall. We must stand up for our rights. We must stand up for our needs, our wants. We as representatives of the United National Congress continue to fight for you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The voice of the people is the voice of God. And we are fed up of this PNM government. We are fed up of Rowley. We are fed up of them continuing to lie to the citizens.
Council for the District of Corp, Paras Takarigot Pakalbat. I stand with the vision of my district in support of this movement here today. We are protesting the raid on our democracy. Our democracy has gone to the dogs, and today we are protesting that. We are saying no to this type of treatment from this government. We are saying no to all the bad things that are happening for our people in this country. Today I stand with MP Khadija, I mean all councillors and all people in this work and others who are saying enough is enough. Time to have a change of government. Rowley must go.
Rowley must go.
Water. Today we are here protecting our democracy. We are against dictatorship. So that is why we are out here today protesting dictatorship. Trinidad and Tobago is a free country. We have a democracy. We have to protect our democracy. People who take advantage of our democracy. So we are against dictatorship.
Smalley here, Alderman Bishop. This is a revolution. We're standing up for our rights. Against property tax, no employment, against oppression, against single mothers, for our children, for Trinidad and Tobago. Justice, enough is enough. A dictatorship government. We don't want that. We're standing up for our democracy. We're standing up for our rights. It's too much wickedness against we people. People of Trinidad and Tobago, time to get up. Time to rise up. Riot and mean that you have to peel big stone and break down things. Simple, stand up for your right. Just as how they ain't buying kiss bread. There are a lot of things we could boycott. Women, we are the strong in this country. Our women, we have to stand together. Each cry of a woman is our cry. When we go in the supermarkets and we see things raise high price, you leave it alone. You have to make sacrifice. We have to be willing to sacrifice for our rights, our children. This thing is not about we, it's about our generation to come. Time for Keith Rowley to go.
Yeah, I'm hearing you. This is I believe we're going to start soon. I need to check. Welcome. Thank you for attending and coming.
Recording in progress.
Welcome. We've now started the recording and we've now officially started our roundtable and webinar for called Halting, the Collapse of Democracy in Trinidad and Tobago. Thanks very much for joining us. We have an excellent, distinguished panel here. I look very much forward to what they have to say. Some very important persons talking about this extremely serious topic. My name is Dr. Kirk Meighoo. I am the Public Relations Officer of the United National Congress. I have a co-moderator today as well. Her name is Sophia St. Hilaire, and she is the Communications Officer to the Chairman of the Couva Talparo Tabaquite Regional Corporation. Welcome, Sophia, to this. And I would just give a brief introduction. This is really a serious issue facing this country right now. It appears as though we are facing a crossroads. And this is not only something that we are facing in this country, because around the world, democracies have been retreating. There was a period from in the 1990s, 2000s, and even the first half of the 2010s when the number of democracies was growing around the world, and the accountability of government, etc., was increasing. And then from about the mid-2010, that started to reverse. And we are now witnessing this in our own country, Trinidad and Tobago, the collapse of our democratic institutions. And we cannot merely be passive witnesses to this process. This is something that can be stopped and can be reversed. And this is what we want to discuss today. And we have an eminent panel of persons who will be discussing this. So I'd like to hand over to my co-moderator, Sophia St. Hilaire, to introduce our panelists and guests. Sophia?
Thank you very much, Mr. Meighoo, Dr. Meighoo. Pleasant good night to our viewing and listening audience. It is my pleasure to introduce our prolific team of independent speakers. Joining us for tonight's roundtable discussions are Dr. Winston Mahabir. Dr. Winston Mahabir has provided political analysis of global issues and the Middle East in particular for the United Nations Department of Political Affairs and Peacekeeping Operations, as well as its policy planning groups as a UN diplomat. His most recent position at the United Nations was Chief of Staff for the UN mission in East Timor. As a diplomat, Mr. Mahabir, Dr. Mahabir, was Trinidad and Tobago's High Commissioner to South Africa with concurrent accreditation to Zimbabwe, Mauritius, Angola, Mozambique, and Malawi, and was ambassador designated to Swaziland, Zambia, Lesotho, and Botswana. Next is Timothy Hamel-Smith. Timothy Hamel-Smith is a lawyer and was former president of the Senate in Trinidad and Tobago from 2010 to 2015. He also acted as president of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on several occasions. Mr. Hamel-Smith also comes from a family with a long political history in Trinidad and Tobago, going back to Arthur Cipriani, Trinidad Labour Party. Ralph Maraj is a former Minister of Foreign Affairs in Trinidad and Tobago, as well as a holder of other ministerial positions. Notably, he has held cabinet-level positions in both the PNF and then the UNC administrations in the 1990s. He is also an accomplished playwright and actor, starring in what many is to believe is the best film ever made in Trinidad, about the rise and fall of an outsider politician. Ms. Nafeesa Mohammed comes from a family steeped in the politics of Trinidad and Tobago. She was a former deputy political leader of the PNM, and her uncle, Kamaluddin Mohammed, was one of the founding members of the People's National Movement, as well as one of the longest serving members of parliament, a whopping 30 years. Mrs. Mohammed served as an opposition senator during the 5th Republican Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome, and thank you all for joining us for tonight's discussions.
Yes, thank you very much, Sophia. And before I open the floor to the speakers, I just want to emphasize that the participants here are independent. Although this is being hosted by the UNC, the speakers are not members of the UNC, and they are representing their own opinions, as this is something that crosses party disciplines, party lines, and it's something that needs to concern all patriotic citizens who are concerned about democracy in Trinidad and Tobago. So I wanted to make that very clear before we start. And also to let you know that we will be taking questions for the panelists afterwards. Right? So please type your questions in the Facebook chat, and they will be then collated and passed on to Sophia at the end to ask her questions. So let me start off by inviting Dr. Winston Mahabir to offer his presentation, looking at the global picture of the retreat of democracy and authoritarianism by stealth, as he calls it. Dr. Mahabir. I believe you are muted, Dr. Mahabir. If you can unmute yourself, please.
Does that do it?
Yes, good, thank you. Dr. Mahabir? Right.
So, thank you again, Dr. Meighoo. Thank you very much again to Sophia. Thank you very much. The panel. Ms. Mohammed?
Yeah, so we're not getting your connection very clearly, Dr. Mahabir. I know you're coming from the United States, which is a third world country now.
And former Minister Ralph Maraj. Great yesterday in answer.
Hello. I think we've lost Mr. Mahabir. I'm very sorry. His connection dropped on us. Are you there? If not, I think we're going to have to go on to our next speaker. Okay.
I can hear you well.
You can hear me. Okay. All right. Maybe you can try.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
So I'll move on. Autocrats and populists on the march around the world, including in European countries that were seen until recently as firmly in the democratic camp. This phenomenon, coupled with the deepening of authoritarian tendencies in already repressive Russia and China, has prompted worries. So we need to trace and grasp as we possibly could. As we emerged from the Cold War, I think there was a legitimate reason for us to believe that the arc of history was going to deliver us at some point in the future, at a time when democracies would be institutionalized around the globe. very strong democracies that facilitated a global trading network commitment to human rights. I think we all hoped we would be there and sensed that where we were headed. That history hadn't quite ended, and were the way forward. That more and more countries would continue joining that issue is less clear. And in the last decade, and in the last few years in particular, we have seen a real slip. I think in the context of both the attractiveness of democracy and the endurance of developing nations such as ours, were flushed with enthusiasm coming out of the Cold War and leadership in the post-World War II era and during the time of the Cold War itself. There was this, and I believe we overestimated the likelihood the West was totalitarian. This beacon of light had opponents that were illiberal, that were just not interested in adopting the democratic trajectory that the US was espousing. I am referring, of course, to China, South Africa in the early 80s, and to us that we had hoped. The second is the sense that globalization in many respects that created this global trading enterprise network was not specs for large segments of populations around the world.
Dr. Mahabir, your connection is really not good, and we're not getting your presentation properly. I'm really sorry to say, because the bits that are coming through are fascinating, and I know you're delivering it very well. It's nothing with you. It's the connection, unfortunately. I think what we'll do is we will move to Timothy Hamel-Smith and then try to get back to you. And if we still have the problem, then we'll have to go to the next speaker. I'm very sorry to have to do this, but we're not hearing you properly. So hopefully when we try again, maybe if you disconnect and come back on, that we can be doing that in the background. I'm very sorry. So let's try that, and I will invite Timothy Hamel-Smith to present now.
Good evening, Dr. Meighoo. It's really a pleasure being here today. The opportunity to speak on these issues which are facing the country, I think, in a very important area, because, as you mentioned, it impacts on our democracy. I don't think it's in dispute that anybody can say that Trinidad has not found itself in a quagmire. We have no police service commission, no commissioner of police, no acting commissioner of police, and a number of events that emerged from that then failed to tell us, even though there was an attempt to do so, as to what the real story is. And of course, when that happens, you leave a vacuum of information, and one has left to wonder, what is the reality? What are the facts which underlay how we come to be at this point in time in our constitution and with regard to our various institutions? So, I think the starting point really is, what happened relative to the question of the Police Service Commission. And as we know, what happens, there are two aspects to it. There's one where you appoint an acting commissioner of police, and there's another aspect, and of course you only do that if you don't have a substantive commissioner, and then the other aspect is a substantive commissioner of police. And the process for doing that is laid out. The Police Service Commission, which is an independent institution, is required by the Constitution to carry out certain roles and come up with a merit list as to who they consider the best persons capable of assuming the role of Commissioner of Police. And you wonder, well, you know, we've gone through this process so many times, and we've faltered many times around, you know, going on that course, that this particular instance has been, if you like, the worst occasion on which we've faltered. We've knocked down, if you like, the bars, and one wonders where we are. We really don't know, and we have to try to trace our steps as best we can as to what happened. So,
if you follow me, as a former acting president, would you have faced a similar sort of situation? I know since you weren't in the substantive role, you might not, but I don't. Were there any occasions when you were acting where you had to, you know, deal with such sort of appointments and things like that?
Yes, but certainly I had an appointment of the Police Service Commission. I don't recall having an opportunity relative to the appointment of the police commissioner. And during that time, what happened was Parliament would have debated the matter. It would have identified 4 persons, and the role of the president was to choose one of those persons to be the chairman of the Police Service Commission. So he was handed 4 people and said, of these 4 people, who should you choose would you choose to be chairman of the Police Service Commission? Certainly one of the things I did, and I think is appropriate process, I in fact asked each of these nominees to let me have a CV, to let me have references, and I reviewed those. I met with all of them. I found out whether or not anyone might have a problem, you know, being part of a committee which was chaired by any one of them before me. And nobody suggested that they would have a discussion. But, you know, I think there's a great difference. Of course, you were just handed 4 people. They were shortlisted for you, as it were. And from that, you chose a chairman. And so when you speak to the referees for these 4, it is a really mind-blowing exercise. If in fact you follow that path, and because you really get a sense of who is capable of taking on the chairmanship or the chair of the Police Service Commission. And of the 4, you ultimately had to make a choice. But I did set down a process, and sometimes the process is important. In this particular instance, we talk in terms, first of all, of appointing a commissioner of police, which I wasn't involved in. But here, the Police Service Commission, having created a merit list, is required to submit it to the president, and the president, under the Constitution, is mandated to refer that issue to Parliament, who then sits and determines whether they accept the first nominee, the second, the third, and we've gone through that process before. Commissioner Gary Griffith was in fact chosen through that process through the Parliament after it had rejected certain of the previous nominees put before the Parliament. And so we've come to this point again. And the whole question is, we don't even, despite all the statements before us, it is hard amazingly difficult to configure what really took place. You have affidavits coming out from the director of personnel administration, the DPA, in which the DPA himself says it was delivered on the 12th. And a very short statement. He said a list of nominees was submitted to Her Excellency on 12th August 2021. There was no delay by the Commission in carrying out its exercise, given the date of issuance of the 2001 order. It was done in less than 2 months. And he says that, makes that statement after he sets out all the issues that the Police Service Commission must adopt, must follow, must look into before making its decision. And then you have, surprisingly, that very same day, another affidavit sworn by the deputy DPA, in which the statement is that the Police Service Commission has withheld submission of the merit list to the President after attempting to do so because of certain security concerns that came to its attention. And that's an amazing statement. The DPA says we submitted it. The thing, he doesn't say anything was wrong. And that was in the morning, the morning of the 12th, of the date, it's the 27th of September. The DPA says we submitted this list. We completed our job, all was ready. And therefore, it supposes that the President was in a position to send that on to the Parliament. But yet you have the Deputy Director saying it withheld submission. The language there suggests that it was never submitted. But it uses this strange phrase, after attempting to do so. So I don't know if perhaps there was an accident when the bearer of this list was going to the office of the President.
As a former acting president,
I don't know.
As a former acting president, how could you see such a scenario playing out?
Well, so then you come to the third issue. Then the President herself makes a statement, and she's published that statement. So we now have a third statement, which doesn't necessarily line up with any of these. Notice the DPA never says what date it took place. She said it was the list was withheld. That would imply that it never left the office of the Police Service Commission, from my perspective. On the other hand, that morning, the actual DPA himself says they delivered it, but they delivered it on the 12th. Yet when you look to the President's statement, she says that on the 11th, it was received at the office of the President. And then she uses language to the effect that it was immediately withdrawn that same day. Now, if I use the word immediately withdrawn, it seems to imply within minutes of this being delivered, it was taken away. But then you hear it's that same day, and you find out that the date she refers to is 11th, which differs from the directive. And she makes a remark saying that she was informed that there were security concerns. So that, has some elements of what the deputy director had said. But why? Who authorized this to be? The President doesn't condescend to particulars. She doesn't say who delivered it. She doesn't say whether she opened it and saw the list. She didn't say who took it back. And, that's, to my mind, a grave omission in a matter like this. And I would have thought that the public deserved to know what happened between the merit list being received and the merit list being taken away.
Let me ask you something about that. For the listeners and viewers looking at this, right? So a lot of these details, might sound very legalistic, arcane, and people say, okay, well, they didn't follow this, and then somebody else has another reason. But how does this threaten our democracy in your view?
Well, the Constitution mandates that the president, so there's no discretion about it. It mandates the president refer these nominees to the parliament for decision. And we don't know what happened. And therefore the public is left concerned. One hears talk about whether there was intervention of some high political official. The president alludes to something having occurred and says, look, it's not my role to discuss what heard, but certainly who took it back, who requested it come back to the Police Service Commission, I think is somebody must have taken it back. And if you read it carefully, you'll notice this president speaks in two voices. She uses the third person to refer to the office of the president. When she wants to speak personally, she says, I. Then you can, it quite clearly states, I, the president, did X, Y, and Z. When she's referring to matters, I take it, outside of her personal domain, she references the office of the president, the OTP. And one wonders, to give the president the benefit of the doubt, whether perhaps he was not in office. So somebody could have delivered a document. Somebody could have called 10 minutes later, or 2 hours, or 4 hours later and says, look, we want back that document. It was sent in error. And somebody at the office of the president sent it back. So it could be that the president had no personal, but we don't know. She doesn't say, she doesn't condescend to particulars to say Mr. X or Mrs. X from the Commissioner of Police called, Mr. Y delivered it. This was the explanation given. And even with the explanations that she does give, she doesn't say who gave her that explanation. And I think the country deserves to be told that.
That's right.
Because all that does lead to more concerns, not less.
Correct. I mean,
if you're hiding the information, then, there are suspicions that will grow. And I don't see any reason why one should not lay the facts bare. And then that, of course, leads you to the question, well, how does one get the facts to be laid bare? And what the UNC decided to do was to take a motion to Parliament, which is a whole nother issue, as it were, because the inquiry that would follow from that sort of motion would require an investigation that ought to produce that evidence. And of course, that gets scuttled. So that's a whole, another issue altogether. I must confess, looking at the procedural rules that the Speaker of the House laid down, I can't understand how she concluded that there should be no debate.
Right.
She refers to, for instance, the Constitution of Nigeria. The Constitution of Nigeria expressly states there will be no debate. And then within her ruling, her early ruling, as it were, that she made before hearing the motion, she says, you cannot write into the Constitution words that do not appear there. But one can only assume what she did was write into the Constitution the words without any debate. And she bases this on the Constitution of Nigeria. And to my mind, it absolutely contradicts. She is right. You cannot write into the Constitution words that are not there and draw an inference from that. But the person doing that inference is, in fact, the Speaker.
Right.
And she alludes to the Constitution as drawn up by the Woodin Commission, harkens back to that. I didn't know the PNM liked the Woodin Constitution, so all this dagger to the heart of the PNM, as it were.
Exactly.
She refers back to it as if it was some support. And of course, one doesn't want to drag the president, and that's what it says, that's what Woodin said, into, matters that were, unless they were of grave concern.
Because, I mean, but
Woodin is talking about it. There should be no debate.
Yeah. Woodin is talking about an executive president in a unicameral parliament that was elected by PR. So it's something entirely different. But Timothy, I want to thank you for your contribution. We'll get back to you afterwards in the discussion and the question and answer. But I would like to invite Nafeesa Mohammed on next. But just to remind Mr. Mahabir, if you could please log off, exit the meeting, and then come back in. So let's see if that helps with the connection, right? So in the meanwhile, while we do that, we will have invite Nafeesa Mohammed to speak. Nafeesa? You're still muted, unfortunately, Nafeesa. If you could just unmute, please.
Sure, sorry about that. A very pleasant good evening. Namaste. Assalamu alaikum. Kirk, I want to say it's a great honor for me to have been asked to be a part of this panel with such eminent persons who I have seen. Dr. Mahabir, when I heard his name, I remembered about the Winston Mahabir in the days when my uncle was alive. The 3 M's, they called them, Kamaluddin Mohammed, Errol Mahabir, Winston Mahabir. But I understand he's the nephew of the late Winston Mahabir, if I'm not mistaken. It's a great pleasure.
You're the nephew of Kamaluddin.
Niece,
I mean the niece. The niece.
And I'm really honored to be here with Ralph, who years ago we would have had our own history together. And of course, Timothy is somebody, His Excellency. It's a great pleasure to be here on the panel with you all. And listening to the former president of the Senate speak just now about the imbroglio that has dominated so much of our, the social media, the news, everything for the last couple of weeks. It really saddens me because today we are talking about halting the collapse of our democracy. And it is really disappointing to me that after all that has been said and done, today I'm just browsing through some newspapers to see our Prime Minister jetting off to somewhere in Scotland and other ministers flying in different places. And it is as if it's business as usual. And then I am to read on the newspapers too that names have been submitted. A 5th name has been put forward with respect to the reconstitution of a police service commission. And then I'm reading further to see what the process has been like, so that whatever it is, there might have been some correspondence with the Prime Minister. It would have been sent to the leader of the opposition. But I was looking further to see, well, some feedback from the consultations that have taken place. And I think out of all of this, there are still so many unanswered questions. And it is as if we are being asked to just gloss it over and to carry on business as usual. And that is what disturbs me, because it is a modus operandi under this administration which leaves a lot to be desired, and our democracy is under threat. I feel strongly about it. I feel passionately about it, because long before this episode, I myself had been exposed to certain, things that happen. And it is really worrisome to know that this is the way how governance is taking place in our country today. And I think we all need to take stock. And there seems to be a deliberate attempt at so many levels to silence people from speaking out. And in my case, I have tried, I continue to try, and I am searching for the truth. I'm searching for justice like many others in the society. And when the events took place 2 weeks ago, whenever with the parliament and whatnot, I was hoping to hear more coming out of the debate. So when Timothy read out just now the dates with certain events, with letters, and what the deputy, the DPA and the deputy DPA would have written in, well, not written, but in affidavit evidence, then there was an ad published by the president's office. And there are so many inconsistencies. And one would have expected by now to get some clarification. And you know, Kirk, I need to say this. Last year, after the general elections, when there was the swearing-in ceremonies taking place, it touched my heart to see our very, how should I put it, our very distinguished president. I still have that respect and regard for our president of the Republic, Paula May Weeks. When she had to swear in the leader of the opposition, I felt that there was a certain kind of understanding connecting the two of them, because not just of the legal background, but they hold the highest offices in the land. And I felt good about our democracy. And today, I can only make an appeal. I pray and I hope that our dear president would use her very good office in a way that some of these unanswered questions can be answered. And let us bring an end to this imbroglio. We want to exhale, and to me, it's not over. And it cannot be business as usual.
I'd like to ask you to comment on this, Nafeesa, about political interference. Now, there's something that I've seen the Prime Minister say, right, about democracy. Saying, well, listen, we are elected. Who are these service commissioners? Who are these people here? They are unelected. So if I, as the elected Prime Minister or an elected minister, intervene, well, that is democracy. So this is the argument they're making, that because they're elected, they have the right to go, you know, to make decisions in these institutions because those people aren't elected. So that is their argument. So
but we do have institutional, we have safeguards. That is why we have a written constitution that protects these commissions, whether it's the Police Service Commission and the other commissions, there are safeguards in the constitution. And therefore we must respect those safeguards. It is frightening to me to think that a political person can have such a significant opportunity to interfere, if I may put it this way, because I heard the conversation going on some time ago about interfacing and interference. And with all due respect, what I have observed boils down, in my view, to political interference. If you want to convince me otherwise, then come clean with the facts and let us know the truth. Up to now, who was the official who would have intercepted the communication that went to the president? We have read reports or speculation as to whether it was the Prime Minister himself or whether it was the Attorney General. I have to wonder whether it was Gary Sobers or whether it was an alien from Jupiter or somewhere else. We need to know. Come clean with the facts. What is the, why? I mean, let us know what is going on. And in that way, it will help to curb some of the speculation and the old talk and put these issues to rest. But when it comes to political interference, believe you me, Kirk, we as citizens, we have a duty to ensure that we protect and safeguard these constitutional rights that we have as citizens, because it is a very dangerous, to me, we are on a precipice and we are sliding downwards quickly.
You know, Nafeesa, I mean, I remember we were both on the Vision 2020 Constitution Reform Committee, which I shared. And yes, I think this is one of the things people don't understand about what a republic is. The republic being different from, being something more than just a democracy. A republic is where you have this separation of powers so that you don't elect a tyrant that will be with their fingers in everything. Where the idea of a republic is that you limit the power. So even though someone is elected, that doesn't mean they can tell everyone anything they want. And so, yeah. So
let me say this
about the Republican Constitution.
Kirk, both Ralph and I would have had the opportunity to work closely with Dr. Rowley over time, whatever the periods were, right? And Dr. Rowley, I have no doubt, they said the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And he's a very experienced politician. But, you know, Mr. Mannen used to make a comment about the psychology. We have to understand the psychology of politics. But to me, and I've said it to him on more than one occasion, we also have to understand the psychology of politicians. And with all due respect, that accident that took place in Tobago with the golf cart recently, for example, you really have to wonder. I mean, Dr. Rowley, he's not a young man, he's getting on in age, and there must be a lot of anxiety. He said it publicly that he hardly sleeps at night, and sometimes, I believe you me, some of the comments I see sometimes, it's like when he can't sleep, he comes up with the weirdest things, and he thinks up the most. But when some of the descriptions I've heard coming out last week, it was about the imps and pimps and chimps. That is all the attacks being made about what is parliamentary and what is unparliamentary. My God, you are the Prime Minister of our country, and you are referring to your colleagues in the Parliament, and it requires a little more respect than that. So that there are three sides to a story, Whatever happened in Parliament, I've heard the comments being made about the fish market and how members of Parliament behave. But when you have the kind of autocratic approach that was adopted, for example, the role of the Speaker in that debate just a few days ago, I have worked under Bridget Anisa George when she was Attorney General, and somehow I feel sorry for her, because as Speaker, perhaps she too is under pressure. When I looked from a distance, looking on at that sitting of the Parliament, joint sitting of the Parliament, I felt sad, because I saw people who I worked so closely with in the PNM, big men and women, and they were just looking so pathetic that they are unable, probably afraid to express a contrary point of view. You can see how they are being muzzled. And it is as if they are afraid of the person who happens to be the leader. And what transpired in the Parliament recently, I think, was disgraceful and unacceptable from a democratic standpoint. I sat in the Senate for 5 years between the period 1995 and 2000. And I was on the Standing Orders Committee as well. And I remember how when we were in opposition at that time, when I was a member of the PNM, and I sat in the opposition benches, you dare not try to restrict our time to speak. Parliament is a place to speak. Parliament means to speak. My father used to always say it. So when you have gone and cut down the times and you have amended the Standing Orders, that same issue about the motion, and whether it's a bikini motion, whatever the description was being used about the motion. The thing is, when you looked at the new Standing Orders, it requires a motion to be at least 250 words. And I understand.
At
most. So to give full particulars, it is something that is a great area. And therefore, the proper thing, in my view, that should have been done, with all due respect, the presiding officer at the time, who was the Speaker of the House, there should have been some consultations and some dialogue, because it's the first time in the history of our country an impeachment motion was being put forward. And therefore, you should have engaged the relevant, in the Parliament, you have a joint sitting, you have independents, you have the opposition. And in terms of agreed on some guidelines, if it is that you were not going to follow the Standing Orders. But my understanding is that under the Constitution of our country, I think it's section 53 or 56 or somewhere there, it speaks about the two houses of Parliament, and that the Parliament will regulate its affairs through Standing Orders. So the Standing Orders spell it out. It was a joint sitting of the Parliament. All right? I remember when in 2001, I think it was, or 2002, when there was a parliamentary deadlock and you could not appoint a speaker. There were several attempts. And what happened? It was the clerk of the House who had the conduct of the proceedings. So that in these circumstances now, whatever, in terms of how the Speaker approached it, I think it was very autocratic. It was something that stifled the discussions that needed to be held, so in the national interest, because it relates to a very significant issue involving the appointment of a Commissioner of Police, and we mishandled the situation. I'm sure there are arguments for and against in terms of the role of the Speaker, but that's another issue. But I want to say that imbroglio was not the only attempt or what we have witnessed in terms of political interference. I am of the view that the style of governance that has been adopted under this administration with all due respect, there is a lot of optics and a lot of interferences that it has been happening. I am concerned, I know Ralph will talk more about this, I'm sure, about the militarization of our governance structures. And I'm saying this against a background because I attend court on many occasions.
Yeah. Well,
and I have witnessed.
Yeah, we've come to the end of the 15 minutes for your contribution. I have a lot to say, and then even, you know, I know there's certain things you can't say because they are in train right now, but this whole phenomenon of political interference in our institutions, I know you've been, dealing with that.
All I want to say, Kirk, is that if we want to halt the collapse of democracy, we have to be prepared to work towards more accountability, more transparency, and I wish the holders of high offices who are involved in this imbroglio would really resolve some of the issues by coming out and speaking the truth and stop covering up. Let us get over this culture of cover-up that has been happening in governance structures. Thank you very much, Kirk.
Absolutely. So let me invite Ralph Maraj now to speak, and then after that we'll try with Dr. Mahabir again. But Ralph, take the floor, please. And unmute yourself, please. I think we had you on mute.
Unmute, right.
Right, good.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you now.
Well, look, let me say that I'm very happy to be here with you. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this important discussion with such distinguished people. Very happy to be here. And the topic is so absolutely important, the threat to our democracy. You know, I think democracy for some people is just an idea. They hear the word and it's been, touted all over and spoken about and so on. But I don't think people understand that the most important thing in our lives is our democracy, because it has to do with our freedoms, it has to do with our rights, it has to do with the opportunities for fulfillment and so on. And I wish, more and more people would be a little bit more alert to the importance of democracy and the threats that come from it, to it from time to time. And there's no doubt that democracy is under threat in the world. In the aftermath of the collapse of communism and the Berlin Wall, you had a flourishing of democracy all over the world. Africa, Latin America, Asia, Eastern Europe, area of Soviet Union. But then, in about over a last decade or so, we have had a reversal. And, totalitarianism reared its head, not through coups and violent overthrows, but through, in fact, democratically elected governments. And that is an interesting phenomenon that we need to study a lot more. Some people have said, for example, that the failure of globalization and the extreme deregulation brought about injustices in the society, inequalities. A lot of wealth was created, but the divide between the rich and the poor, those who were benefiting and those who were not, that widened considerably in and among nations. And you have seen this reversal. So that in Trinidad and Tobago, and that has continued. I mean, for example, at the moment, and I was very pleased to hear the present President of the United States, Joe Biden, articulate that one of his principal concerns in foreign policy would be this battle between democracy and autocracy. And of course, he's focusing principally on the influence of China and Russia and the threat it poses, these pose to democracy and the spread of authoritarianism that can come from the influence of these two. But I'm very happy that the leader of the free world, the United States, especially after the withdrawal and the insular, myopic approach of his predecessor, I can't remember his name now, Trump. We have this refreshing attempt to bring back Western civilization, all of the leaders of the free world in Europe and across the Atlantic, to again counter the approach of authoritarianism and the spread of authoritarianism. Within this context, Trinidad and Tobago has to be very aware of the kind of world that we live in. And we have a part.
I wanted you to, I know we spoke before, I wanted you to comment because, a lot of listeners may not remember or they may not know at all, your role when you had to stand up for tyranny that was coming in Trinidad and Tobago when your sister, who was Speaker of the House, was placed under house arrest, a state of emergency over one house, pictured over your sister's house, and then, that caused a convulsion, and you really took a leading role, and you had to decide what are you going to do to stop this tyranny in the country. And this was 95, I believe, 94, 95.
I was coming to that, Kirk. I was saying that we in Trinidad and Tobago have a particular problem with authoritarianism in our political system. It could be that we have inherited this authoritarian colonial structure, this authoritarian colonial paradigm. And some of us have said that the constitution that we developed did not really depart sufficiently from that authoritarian culture that we inherited. And as such, all politicians almost, a lot of politicians, many politicians, assume the authoritarian posture and assume the authoritarian character once they enter the government, once they enter the cabinet, once they maybe enter parliament. I suppose they do so within their constituencies, whether they're in opposition or in government. There is this authoritarian approach towards the execution of their duty. So rather than be the servant of the people, which is really what you're supposed to be, they have this authority over the people. And that is something that we have seen in all governments in varying degrees. This particular administration has demonstrated a very strong tendency towards authoritarianism. And you see it in so many of their leading people, their frontliners, for example. And people have had to, commentators and editorials and so on, have had to call for the tempering of the arrogance and that has been demonstrated by the government, the frontliners. Take the finance minister, for example. He's extreme in adopting this character. I remember the former Minister of National Security, telling people who were expressing concerns about policemen wearing combat uniform, ignore them, ignore the silly conversations. Nobody cares about what you're saying. Ignore the silly conversations, the stupid conversations, and so on. Both the Prime Minister and this particular minister, have been quick to, categorize activists, certain people in the society, as treasonous and seditious. They wanted to protect the Sedition Act, which was really a law to preserve the authoritarianism of the colonial masters. So that this government has demonstrated authoritarian proclivity. There's no doubt in my mind about that. The Attorney General, who is supposed to be the protector of the law, the guardian of the law, the guardian of the human rights and so on of people, he has been one of the most political attorney generals attorneys general in our history, always jumping to the defense of obviously errant ministers. We've had several examples of it, and I can quote them all. But that is not really the kind of image that you want to have of an attorney general. He has even gone so far as to say there's no right to privacy. And he had to be chastised by the venerable former Chief Justice, Michael de la Bastille. And he's not averse, and he says it openly, that he is going to do his best to ensure that he passes law where he can bypass the 3/5 majority in the parliament and things like that. So, and he has done it. He has done it. So this is an issue that we have to be very, very careful about. The Prime Minister himself has displayed very significant authoritarian tendencies. The language he uses, very abrasive, sometimes very ugly language. I mean, and there's a whole history of it. And I can quote them, but I mean, they're sometimes so ugly that it may not be wise to repeat them. It is distasteful, the kind of things that have come out from the mouth of the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley. I mean, I remember, for example, him telling a businessman who had, dared to make a statement that seemed to be critical of the government. This is the former CEO, I think the present CEO of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce, that he is somebody who is just sucking from the country and is deserving of a kick in the pants. The Prime Minister seemed to want to kick people. He wanted to kick a member of parliament, use a particular boots, a garden boots, to kick a member of parliament. So, and when language is so endemic, when crassness it seems to be part and parcel of the character coming out in your language, then we have to be very careful, because that kind of violence in the language can lead to actual violent action, as has been seen. Prime Minister A.N.R. Robinson, when he was the president, he warned us about creeping dictatorship and streams flowing into rivers and so on. Of course, he was referring to the then Pandey administration. But it is something that we have to bear in mind with all politicians. Because if we do not object to this kind of language and this tendency towards despotism, we could actually reach to the point where there will not only be threats to kick, but we could have goons coming in the dead of night and kick down your door. And that is a very real possibility. Very, very real possibility. So we have got to be very careful about that. Now, one of the very ominous things that has happened in recent times is that the president of the Republic, the head of state, let me take a drink of water. The head of state herself has now seems to have taken on this mantle of authoritarianism. Because for a whole month, people were clamoring, for her to reveal what happened when that high official visited the president's house and what transpired. Because we all know what transpired led to the eventual collapse of the Police Service Commission. We all know that what transpired was that the merit list of the Police Service Commission was stopped from being transmitted to the Parliament as it was supposed to be done. But the President refused to speak. She refused to speak. And when she did decide to speak, it was not through an address to the nation, a nice, polite address to the nation, or a press conference where she could have interacted with the people. But it was really through a removed and detached paid advertisement of a statement that she made. And that statement, I'm sorry to say, reeked of authoritarianism, as though she was speaking to errant children. Here's what she said: I will not address the question of who came to the office of the president and met or spoke to whom. That's what the lady pronounced it. That is not practice of this office. It was amazing, amazing. The burning issue was summarily shoved aside. The people of this republic were clamoring for a light to push back against what they saw as an encroaching dark. But the president did not deign to offer an explanation of what triggered the withdrawal by the then chair of the Police Service Commission of the merit list of candidates for police commissioner. Up to now, we don't know. Up to now, we don't know. So, faith in this country's democracy was being shredded. But the highest office in the land will not tell the people now who that now infamous high public official is who visited the president's house and made that intervention that led to the collapse of the independent police service. And she says it is not the practice of the message. Well, I have to ask Her Excellency, who laid down that law, madam? Who laid down that law? Your office belongs to the people who fund it. The people have a right to know what takes place there. You have to tell them. And if you can't, do the honorable thing, please. Do the honorable thing, please.
Yeah.
She said that she does not consider revealing who came and what transpired helpful in analyzing the issue.
Exactly.
As I had told her, could you leave that to us, madam, please? Because we are talking here of an intervention that led to the collapse of the police service. We are looking at a very clear possibility that the office of the nation's president could be tainted by political interference. We are faced with a very dark possibility of political interference in preventing a critical appointment to a critical independent institution that deals with the nation's security. This is a dangerous path to dictatorship, where politicians direct the police service to murder and assassinate opponents. That has happened.
Yeah.
Goons kicking down people's doors in the dead of night. And so I asked the president, do we want that situation? And how then could you think that this information that you are supposed to give us will not be helpful? It is astounding.
I'd rather ask you to close up because the 15 minutes have passed and we need to.
15 minutes have passed. Okay. All right. You know, as I say, when we reach a point in this country, ladies and gentlemen, where the three arms of the state, and I haven't yet gone into the speaker. I mean, speaker is another issue. You have the head of state, the head of the parliament, right? And the government itself, the political directorate itself. Possibly, is there possible collusion? I have asked, for example, is the president, adamant refusal and her protection of this high-level visitor? Is there an incestuous relationship between the office of the president and the political directorate?
Well, let's get to the questions and answers. I see Dr. Mahabir has gone, but he's not come back in. I wanted to try him again. I know people in the chat apparently have been referring to his book that he wrote. They've been asking for his signature to sign copies of the book. So that is, it's unfortunate that his connection wasn't there. But we do have some questions. We do have questions from our listeners and viewers, I should say. Sophia, can you perhaps ask some of those questions? I don't know if we'll be able to reach all because we should finish at about 7:15. So that's about 10 minutes. Why don't you choose maybe question 4 or question 4 seems like a good one, but you can choose which one you want to ask them.
Great, I was actually going to lead off with that one. So the AG stated that the Constitution is ever changing. Who authorized and sanctions the changes to the Constitution, the highest law of the land? Does the AG just make up the law? Probably ask Ms. Nafeesa to start off with that.
Yeah, if you can unmute yourself. Did you hear the question properly?
No, it was very
right. You want to please?
So one of our viewers asked, the AG stated that the Constitution is ever changing. Who authorized and sanctions the changes to the Constitution, which is the highest law of the land? And does the AG just make up?
And does the AG
make up the law?
Exactly. The Constitution is it's like a living organism. We have a written Constitution. So often I've heard the former Prime Minister Basiel Pandey, whenever we are going through a crisis, he speaks about that need for constitutional reform. And Kirk, you yourself, you have helped to bring all the attempts from colonial times right up to when we sat in that governance committee on constitutional reform. I remember that chronology. And the thing is that we are at a point in our history and in our country where under this administration, I hardly hear talk about constitutional reform. And when they do decide to interfere or to do anything involving the Constitution, I am disappointed and concerned about the approach that this Attorney General has been taking when it comes to bringing legislation to the Parliament and provisions that require constitutional safeguards. They're just stupid.
If I may, Nafeesa, I think one of the things out of that question is that the Attorney General seems to be very perverse with that statement, because whereas as Basiel Pandey or myself or yourself or others who have called for constitutional reform are talking about, yes, changing it for the better. His argument seems to be, well, the Constitution can be changed to anything you want. It doesn't have to be better. It could be you have no more privacy. Privacy doesn't exist. So he's saying that the Constitution is nothing really. And you can put anything you want in the Constitution, and that's what they're going to do.
And that is the sad part.
Philosophy.
Right, and he comes to the Parliament with legislation where he removes the constitutional safeguards and passes it with a special majority for political expediency purposes. And it's concerning. Look at, there's going to be an election in Tobago. That whole internal self-government process, it requires constitutional reform, and it is a process that has taken years. You don't just change the Constitution when you get a VAPS. It is a process that has to be observed. And therefore, there must be that dialogue and that consultation. And the people must have a say when you are changing the Constitution. It cannot just come from on top. It is where the people are the ones who must help to make that possible. And at present, it just to get around the problems that they have in getting especially majorities in the Parliament, all these devices. And the AG speaks as though he's being so creative with it. But it is dangerous, and it is contributing towards the collapse of our democracy. And we have to be concerned, and we have to be committed to arresting this as soon as possible.
Let me ask Timothy to step in here. Timothy, about this Constitution ever changing and the AG's attitude towards that.
Yeah, well, certainly, amendments to the Constitution, as Nafeesa said, ought to come in conjunction with the people. You really need to hear what they have to say. It ought to reflect their desires, their wants, their needs. You have to have the checks and balances which you earlier referred to, or else, in fact, independent institutions are exceedingly important. I mean, even look at the United States. If during the rule of Trump, there were not independent institutions, everything would have collapsed in terms of democracy. And the same applies to Trinidad and Tobago, even to greater extent. The level of power that our Prime Minister has, I'm not referring to any specific purpose, the office of the Prime Minister has, is enormous. It starts off because he determines who will no matter what any constitution says in the party constitution, he determines who will go up in each constituency. He determines who will form the cabinet. He'll determine who is the Senate. And really, you've left a situation which I think you described earlier, that no damn dog within his cabinet dare bark unless it is in the same chorus as the prime minister. And that's what happens, and that's how you erode your democracy. I have no doubt in saying our democracy is already flawed. And in fact, it's being eaten away with each one of these interventions without the people having any say.
And remember Sparrow sang "Get the Hell Out of Here" in 1965 about the same sort of attitude of the then Prime Minister Eric Williams and his attitude. So
you don't like it.
Kirk, I just want to add a point to what is being said there, because I think there is a particular area that needs to be looked at closely. For example, in some of the responses we have heard about from the President's office, and it is as though you would only get only what information that is necessary, kind of thing. You see, this institution called the National Security Council, which is a place where a lot of decisions, it would seem, emanate from, and we have witnessed what has transpired. I don't want to go into too much details when it comes to security matters and so. But I think that it's an area that needs to be revisited and looked at closely. And I used the word militarization earlier because I find that there is a tendency to just take wholesale some of the things. You know, they have a concept called GUP. When people say you take GUP or whatever, if you even get information and it's sensitive information and that, then there are processes and procedures that you can embark upon to verify the accuracy of the information that you have gotten before you take draconian steps to enforce and whatever. And I have witnessed, because of my practice in law, dealing with migrant issues and what have you, we have a situation where the borders of this country wide open, all right? And at the end of the day, there is a need, in my view, to balance some things and to revisit some of our institutions, some of our new laws and the new administrative mechanisms that have been put in place. We need to do a little introspection. And it is similar, you know, right now there's this big case that is happening in India with Shah Rukh Khan's son, Aryan Khan. And the NCB, the National Narcotics Bureau, that is an issue that is coming out of all of this. It is a creature of statute, whatever powers they have, but the years of operation, it needs to be revisited.
Yeah, so I mean, the constitutional basis of the National Security Council, I think I don't know what constitutional authority it actually has.
And that was part of this whole imbroglio. When you appointed two people to investigate, up to now I'm waiting to hear what are the crimes that the former commissioner of police has, what he has committed. And then you appoint two people. What is their local standard in having to investigate something like this?
Let me bring in Ralph Maraj on the question of the ever-changing constitution and the current Attorney General's peculiar interpretation of that.
The Attorney General's interpretation of?
The ever-changing nature of the Constitution. I mean, he refers to that a lot in order to basically say, in my station, that he can do what he wants because the Constitution is changing anyways. What's so sacred about that?
I have referred to the present Attorney General as an undergraduate, and I don't think that he is capable at the moment of directing any discussion on this critical issue of constitutional reform. Our Constitution, I have described it as deformed, as retarded, because it imposes, some people have said, a halfway house. It imposes a lot of that authoritarianism that I was talking to you about, so that the core of our authoritarian proclivities on the part of our politicians could be the very Constitution itself. Timothy spoke about the enormous powers of the Prime Minister. There is no real separation of powers. Look at our Parliament, our Parliament. Look at the opposition. Look how generally impotent the opposition has been rendered by the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we need to have Constitution reform to have and to ensure real separation between the executive and the presidency and the Parliament and the legislature and the executive. Can we not have, for example, eliminate the whole question of the president, office of the president, and have an executive president who would choose a cabinet, not necessarily from members of elected members. Those are issues that we need to look at so that you can preserve the separation of powers between the legislature and the executive. So it's a big issue. I have termed the Prime Minister, the power that the Prime Minister has made him a reincarnation of the colonial government in a very real sense of the word. So, these are profound issues that need deep thinking.
We're going to have to close up because we have Arnold Roberts coming up next, and they have to do that. But what I want to do is before we close, and I will ask Sophia to give the final word of thanks. But as you go, I'd like you to just briefly, 30 seconds, 1 minute, for people. I'd like you to say, what can we do about this? In your view, what can and what should we do about this situation where we are seeing the institutions collapsing, the president and our high office holders not willing to call a tribunal to make the parliament function properly, to tell the population who visited president's house, etc. What can we do? I will start off with Timothy, then Nafeesa, then Ralph, because unfortunately Winston has not been able, Dr. Mahabir hasn't been able to join us again. Timothy.
Yeah. I think the linchpin of the entire thing resides in the office of the president. And we must continue, because I think that if she hears more voices, that perhaps she will condescend to give us the particulars that are omitted from her statement, which would in fact give us an entire picture of what has happened. And the truth is, if we do not do that, we will embark into a new police service commission, and the people generally feeling that they have just taken the bull by the horns, did what they wanted and got away with it. And they will do it again. It's just one chink in the armor that, leads at the end of the day to the armor being removed altogether. And that's a real fear. So we must continue to knock on the door of the president. I think it's virtually, she's our only hope. And she must be persuaded that she ought to, in the interest of our country, to give us the particulars which have been omitted from her statement.
And from a former acting president, those are important words. Nafeesa, Mohammed.
Yes, I agree with Timothy 100% in terms of having that hope in the president to still bring us out of this crisis in a manner that we can arrest the collapse of our democracy and to be able to start restoring and repairing the damage that has been done. And more than that, there are certain institutions that we have to pay respect to. The role of the opposition in the parliament and the role of the leader of the opposition are safeguards. They are at the heart of our democracy. And that respect must be shown regardless of who the personalities are in the offices. And that is something that needs to be restored. The dignity and the respect for the opposition and the parliament, be it in the Senate and the House of Representatives. That is something that with this recent event, people have taken it in a different direction, and we need to bring it back. They are the guardians of our democracy. I had been in opposition for a few years and had that experience, and we must not ever give in and surrender to being silenced. The Parliament is a place to speak. Let us restore that dignity and respect and allow free speech in the Parliament. And that's my message also to the Speaker of the House of Representatives and the President of the Senate, to allow people the opportunity to represent their constituents and to speak on behalf of whichever interest groups that they represent.
Excellent, excellent. And Ralph, Maraj?
In addition to everything that has been said, but if we are talking about preserving our democracy and strengthening our democracy, we have to ensure accountability on the part of the politicians. And that accountability will not come until we stop the tribalism in the politics. We've got to stop the tribalism, because whichever party is in power, they can do whatever they want, violate constitution, violate the law, do whatever they want. But they know they have the support of the base, the tribal base. We've got to stop that. And the people of the country must wake up and see what is happening to their land, what is happening to their country, what is happening to their society, and hold politicians accountable. Not because a politician looks like you means that he will get away with anything as far as you are concerned. That is what key thing. And that is a cultural thing, that is the sociological thing that we also have to attend to. We cannot only deal with the law and the constitution and so on. That is all important. We must hold the president accountable and everything. But we must hold the people also accountable and make them accountable to themselves. Make them develop the capacity to protect themselves and to protect themselves.
Okay. All right, well, thanks very much. And for the final thanks, let me hand it over to Sophie to thank everybody on our behalf.
Thank you, Kurt. So just want to extend a special thank you to each of our guests on tonight's panel. All your insight to this grief has been plaguing our country. Ms. Nafeesa Mohammed, Mr. Timothy Hamel-Smith, Mr. Ralph Maraj, unfortunately, Dr. Mahabir, who wasn't able to bring out his message across to us. We thank him as well. Hopefully we will have him again on another date on another panel. So thank you all very much for viewing and listening audience. Thank you as well for joining us tonight, and do enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you, Kirk.
Good night. And
Archie.